My name is Pat Fairon. I My full name that I was baptised and I was given is Patrick John Fairon. The one name that I chose for myself was my confirmation name, which was Francis, after a friend of mine at the time, Francie Mall. My date of birth is the 6th of February 1944, which makes us, at this time of speaking, I'm in my 77th year, but I'm 76 years old.
And who else went to the school at that time? Who were your siblings?
Well, my siblings at home, were, my sisters, the three eldest sisters would have been at the school when I was there. That's Brenda, Sheila, and Ethna. But in terms of people that I went to school with, from that were in the same class as me, the man that was in the same class as me, and I sat with him on the first day at school, and he's dead now, Paddy Smith. So Paddy was a contemporary of mine, okay, down to that. Not the same age, but because I started early. The other people that I don't remember very much beyond a couple of other boys that were in the same class as me, and that was Seamus Mallon, again, dead and gone, Tully Goonigan, and God, Damien Mackle, I nearly forgot Damien. So we were in the same at the same class together, yeah. And it was a small intake. It was a small school, but that was the size of the intake that year, as I remember it. Then there were other. Although again, it comes back to me. And another man dead and gone is Toll. He was God, I can't remember. Kevin Toll. Kevin, I think, was in the same class as us. But the memories that I have then sort of were marked that was us. We were the new boys. Frankly, I can't remember if there was any girls, because we didn't take much of an interest in girls at that time.
And just before you go on about the school, where was home at the time?
Home is where we are here now. This was, home was Ballygassoon, as it was then. The address was just Ballygassoon, not as it is now, 152 Ballygassoon Road. But this was, this was the home place where I'm talking to you now. Again, it's very close to the Flush, but we're up the hill from the Flush, yeah. And that's where the Ballygassoon Road runs, yeah.
So you mentioned some of your classmates. Do you remember the teachers at the time?
I do very well. When I went to school, the teacher for, you call it now, induction, was Miss Valdy, Bridget Valdy. But she wasn't a well person, and she was off at regular intervals. And the teacher that I remember most from that time, and with some fondness, and she's still alive to this day, and still the same sharp, bright woman that I remember, is Molly Cunningham. Over, I think the townland was on the tip of my tongue when I started to tell you. But Molly came to that school as a relief teacher. She was still in training, I think, or just finished her training. But and remembering teachers, she came and she made such a big impression on me and on the school in her time there, because she was fresh out of college and she was full of ideas, and she's a very positive woman in herself anyway, before she got any teacher training. Okay, she was a really great teacher, yeah, and she was well liked, and to the fact that when she left, there's a lot of us cried, and I was one of them.
So apart from Miss Cunningham, do you remember anyone else?
Oh yeah, well that was the upstairs, because the school was divided at that time. The upstairs was the juniors up until I think about 8 or 9 year old, and then downstairs, John Valdy was in charge there. He was the headmaster, yeah, and he taught downstairs. So those are the only teachers that I remember in my time at the school. Yeah.
And do you remember John Valley as a character?
Oh, a very strong character. Well, you had to be if you're going to, sort of, if you're going to run a school, and especially if you're going to run a, sort of a primary school in, sort of in a community that had, sort of had a strong sense of itself, and sort of in what, sort of what didn't go, and bad English there, Pat. No, John was a very strong character, and he did run the school, and not to the satisfaction of everybody. Now, I have to say, sort of there was split at the time, and that would still survive, sort of as to, the way John ran the school. But from my point of view, I was, I hit that road run in terms of the education system, because I was reading before I went to school. My mother taught me to reading the Beano and comics and things like that there. And so from the word go, and when you went to school, there was it wasn't an examination, but there was a review of what shape you were when you got there, and sort of you had to be able to know how to bless yourself. And then could you read, at all? And then did you know any poems? And there was some people that were badly prepared for that, and came up with the wrong sort of poem that they were known ever after. That should not have been repeated. When I was young, I had no sense. Was the start of one of them. I'm not going to finish it.
So, do you remember any official school visitors?
Oh yes, there were. Sort of there were. Well, the most frequent visitor would have been Father Coyle, and I think he had an interest in sort of he had an interest in football and what he called with John Valley, because John at the time was very involved in football. Sort of I think he played county, and then during the time I was at the school, was at 53, and Armagh got to the All Ireland. Sort of. John was a trainer, and there was, sort of, so it was, he was a GAA man, sort of in football minded. So there was that connection between him and Father Coyle. Ostensibly, Father Coyle was out there to keep an eye on our religious, sort of education, or indoctrination, if you want to call it by another word, and sort of how we were getting on with our catechism. But sort of there was beyond that, there was social, sort of there was a very social aspect to it. The other regular visitor was a man called Paddy Donnelly, who lived, sort of up at the top of what they call the White Hill or the White Brae. I should have checked back on that. It's the road up. It's opposite where Aidan Toll lives now, and I think Haggins lived at one stage. But at the time, Paddy lived in a beautiful wee oasis of calm and sort of and beauty, with flowers and bees and what he called, and sort of in a wee sort of wooden type house. But he was a retired civil servant and very interested in education and history and whatever. And he would call down regularly with at lunchtime, just for a chat. And he didn't really talk to the people very much. He would have talked with John Valley in the lunchtime, yeah. And there were other visitors that I remember distinctly. I remember the knit nurse coming around, and she would have been, well, that was, sort of, there was an element of shame in that you didn't want to be, and sort of, the knit nurse was coming, and there was a shame if there was knits found in your hair. That was what he called that. It was a black mark again, your mama for not looking after you, right? And you were sent home with this pink liquid. That was a mark of shame if you were given this pink liquid to bring home. The other visitor that, and I've got a very distinct memory of it, was Mrs. Fitzgerald, who seemed to have the contract for school dentistry at the time, coming out with, and there was no electricity. There was never any electricity in the school in my time. So she had to bring her own equipment, and it was pedal powered. She had this machine, and you had to paddle it like a sewing machine, and it was very slow. And it put a lot of people off getting their teeth drilled ever after, yeah. But that was her. The other visitor that I remember with pleasure and a very distinct memory was and again, down to John Valdy for bringing him in. He brought a comedian, or not a comedian, a magician in that performed for the whole school. And I remember volunteering and getting cut in half by a rope. Just put this rope round your waist. Then when the two strongest boys in the school, you see, were putting either end of it for to give us a real good tug and the expectation was, if they give it a real good tug, you'd be cut in two. Then the rope came through. No, that would be, well, I suppose the other thing, and I actually just came across a sample of it. We did have an official school photographer came round. There was a commercial thing where they came round and they took a photograph of the whole school. And then they took individual photographs that you paid for, yeah. I come across my own individual photograph there, which I must dig out. And I will I've put together for the site so that you can see what sort of why you're dealing with them, yeah.
And you had parents coming occasionally, did you?
You had, but sort of that was. You heard about that because if parents came, sort of, and it was only ever John Valdy that they came to see. I can't remember parents ever coming in to see Miss Valdy, but. He would go out to them, right? And you stayed in the class, and you were warned not to be run out to the toilet, make an excuse out to the toilet. So whatever happened, sort of between the master and the parent, tend to happen on the street. And I can remember one incident, but I cannot remember who it was. I've got my suspicions, but I'm not going to name any names here, because we don't want anybody getting upset one way or the other about it. But that was the way parents were dealt with, sort of if they did come to the school, and there always was the threat of some parent, because John was a bit heavy with a stick and could be heavy with a stick, and and if it had gone too far on the parent side, and there was always that possibility. You would get an occasional parent that would object. That was usually what parental visitors were about, never about anything else. Yeah.
And what do you remember about the school itself and how it was laid out?
Well, it was a very solid building, sort of a two-story. Part of the building was occupied by the caretaker. Mrs. Norris had almost like an apartment, ground floor. At the north side of the school. It was set back in about an acre of ground, which apparently had been purchased, and have learned since, or was it donated by the landlord. It was on the roadside, was now called the Moors Island Road. We didn't know it as any other name at that time, other than the road from the school down to Jackie Boys, down to that road, was called down by Biddy Malloy's. Now Biddy Malloy's I understand now, was a woman who inherited and had a property on the roadside about 100 yards down below the school, gable end onto the road. But when we knew it, Biddy Malloy was long dead, and she had left the place to I think it was a servant boy, or he'd worked with her in a lifetime, and she left the place. And his name, I don't know what his proper name was, but he was known as Craig Cullen. So down by Biddy Malloy's was past this mysterious house with this a very lonely character. Yeah, he was a very isolated, almost a hermit, called Craig Cullen. Yeah. So, that's the location. Sorry, I drifted off the subject. I was way down. I was way down the Biddy Malloy's there. No, the school itself, two-story. I think it was slated. There was an entrance hall, sort of on the school yard. Then you entered the building. There was a stairway, went up into the upstairs, where there was a big room and a couple of smaller rooms, the wee rooms as we call them, okay? Then downstairs to the right, there was a big storage cupboard for coats or whatever underneath the stairs, and then beyond that, you're into the main room, the master's room, which extended the full width of the, what do you call it, of the building to the back wall, or to the back gable. At the back gable, there was separate dry toilets for the boys and girls, yeah. Boys to the left, girls to the right, yeah.
And it had a garden and things like that?
Oh, it did, yeah, forgetting about that. There was to the uphill side of the school was a small garden, triangular garden. And there was a lot of work done in that. John Valley did a lot of work in terms of involving different classes in horticulture and learn how to dig and how to plant and how to plant and sow. And there was stuff grown in that, and useful stuff grown in that. Beyond that was an important part of the school playground area, or the area that we had available for play. It was known as the big trees, and I think there were 6 of them, big beech trees. Like they were on the roadside, on a bank above the road, and yeah, I think there was 6 of them at one stage, and then there was one of them that I remember particularly. It fell in the wind, and my uncle Joe Horn got timber from it and took and sawed it on the spot, or reduced it to a stick, as he would call it, big enough to load on a wee tractor, a wee Ferguson tractor, and that was took away on the back of a Ferguson tractor down the hill to the Grange Street. And when the load went on the back of the tractor, the front wheels lifted, so she had to be steered down that hill using the foot brakes. That was one of the trees, but the other trees are since gone, and it's a real loss, because they were a landmark for the school, sort of more than anything, yeah.
And then just another thing that occurs to me is that Master Valley used to encourage people to draw flowers and plants as well.
He was very keen, he was keen both on the botanical side of it, the botany, okay, but he was also keen on the art of it, okay, of the representation of it. He was a painter himself, and had both drawn and painting, okay, for those 2 purposes, yeah. And that would express itself in teaching aids at that time, where the blackboard was big, and I can remember very distinctly really beautiful chalk drawings that he would have done of flower parts, the stamens. It's coming back to me now. Thank you for asking that question. Of this, and them all carefully labelled, okay, and that would have been the botanical side of it. And then the other side of it was in terms of representation. You learned to mix colours. You learned how to to do washes. It was all watercolour work, and using the traditional school paint box.
And then in terms of the traditional subjects that were taught in every school, the reading, writing, arithmetic, what was that like? What are your memories of being taught that?
Well, my memories are all happy of that, tell you the truth, because as I say, I was off to a good start in that, that big leap that you have to make into what I call into reading and writing. I was really well on my way to that when I started. So I sailed through that, and that was a pleasure. Reading has always been a pleasure to me. And I didn't take much. I didn't have much learned to do. I already had got my foothold in that. The reading, writing, arithmetic. Well, we knew that as sums at the time, yeah. And I've got very clear memories of the system that was taught. Having done a wee bit at teacher training in terms of teaching subjects, and I realise now that that was There was a big gap in that because you went straight into figuring with figures rather than learning how to count and learn how to, sort of the way into it through the reality of counting things, yeah. The thing that I do remember more clearly about the writing side of it was that we learned to write, sort of initially on slates with chalk. There was and these were artificial slates, but there were in the master's cupboard there was old slates, the same as the slate you get off the roof, and there was a slate pencil, which I'd never heard about for a long time after that. Okay, and this was a pencil made out of slate that you wrote on the same slates you get off the roof. But the slates that we worked with were artificial slates, composite slates, and you wrote on them with chalk. You moved on from that to writing on paper with pencil in your jotter or whatever, yeah. And then the big leap was, when you came to you learned your letters and things like that there. But then the big leap in writing was learn to write properly, joined up writing, sort of the upstrokes and the downstrokes. And for that, you used a dip pen in ink. There was the desk had ink wells in them, and you dipped into the ink well. And there was a whole how would you call it? There was a whole business around maintaining the ink, and there was an ink monitor, and there was a big bottle of ink that that was used to replenish these inks. And then if the ink was getting low, then to eke the ink out, the ink would be watered to make it go further. And the result is, as the term went on, the ink, you were right, it got fainter and fainter. But there was a headline copy system that you learned to copy called the Veer Foster, that consisted of a headline with proper, organisation of the joined up letters and sentences, moral sentences, be good and whatever, yeah. And then you copied that, 4 or 5 lines. You attempted to copy that handwriting. That was the way you learned how to improve your handwriting, yeah, using the Veer Foster method, yeah.
And did everybody in the Grange end up with the same handwriting?
Well, they should. They should, and you'll see that in some of in some people that came through that. If it did take with them, right? Okay. To be frank, there's an awful lot of people never really got it, and the reversion then was back to, not joined up writing, okay, printing your thing, okay, but people that did get it, finished up with a copperplate handwriting. And that was a sense of pride, if you had good handwriting, it would have been copperplate, and you would have got it from Veer Frost. And I tell you something else, I've always recognised the Americans seem to have a standard, at one time, seem to have a standard method of teaching handwriting. Because it's very easy for a generation, at least some time back, to recognise American handwriting, yeah. It's a very distinct sound, distinct from the Veer Foster one, yeah.
And what other subjects were taught then in the school?
Well, it was the reading, the writing, arithmetic. As said there earlier, John Volley was very keen on a whole range of subjects that I think were supposed to be on the curriculum, and I don't know if every school, at that time, particularly rural schools, would have would have covered them the way he did. Starting with music. Well, now that was a big thing in schools. As anybody could teach music, and neither he nor Miss Valley, it would appear, had got music. But he compensated for that by bringing in a radio. We had no electricity, but he brought in his own battery radio, and we got the schools programs, teaching singing. Now, they weren't the sort of songs that we, that I think we or the parents would have liked us to be learned, but at least it was learned to sing. And so that was an innovation that he did. He used the radio for a range subject. The other subject that I can remember him using the radio to back up was nature study. as he called it, and that went from everything to flowers to to animals, to insects and whatever. Okay, and I can remember really distinctly the clearest memory of that was hearing a program on pond life, and of course with the what do you call it, with the program there was an accompanying booklet came that would illustrate aspects of the subject on the discussion. And there was the pond life, and there was, I can remember there was water boatmen that had got these oar type things, and they lay on their back, and nobody had ever seen them before until we saw them on this program. Then where they were being found everywhere. And then there was caddisfly larvae, and they were found. But I spotted this particular insect. It was called a water scorpion. And it does look like a scorpion. It's got wee claws out like that there. And it's got it does look like a scorpion. It was very small. And I went on a hunt down in the bog down here with a jam jar, dredging the drain. And one of the things I came up with was one of these water scorpions. Now, my father, who was at that sort of thing, had never seen this thing in his life. This was a sensation. And I brought it into school, and I was afraid to bring it in. And I had it down, sort of down the lawn, and the jam jar with this creature, and then the word got round, oh, Pat Fairon's got a water scorpion. And I brought it in. But again, that was, sort of, to me, was the positive side of John Valdy's teaching. Sort of, he did open up a lot of what he got for me, and for many people. He did open up a lot of horizons, and that was one of them. That was an interest that was opened up and encouraged. The other thing that he did was he taught painting. Sort of, he was very interested in poetry. Sort of would learn the poems that I could still, sort of remember the start of. I don't know if I can remember them all. You learn them off by heart, but not just learn them off by heart. He really did bring us to an understanding of the pleasures of poetry. Sort of way before his time. Like, it wasn't just reciting. It was like there's one poem that I can remember. Do you remember an inn, Miranda? Do you remember an inn? I'm lost because it goes on into somebody remembering dancing and the fleas at teas in the high Pyrenees. It's a memory of travelling abroad and being in being in a country inn in Spain or someplace like that there. But the rhythm of it, and that was the thing that I can remember John Valdy emphasising to us when we were reciting it, that the rhythm was as important as the words, because the rhythm get the excitement of it, yeah. And again, he was way ahead of his time in that, sort of in terms of my understanding of how poetry is maybe still taught. Poetry, what else would it be? He used to take on nature, just walks, just to look for what was in your immediate environment down the roads. There was no effort made to teach. Well, there was no gymnastics or anything like that there. There was a ball, and if you want to go out and kick with it. And then there was attempt made to bring hurling into the school, which resulted in a face-off between John Valdy and his regular visitor, Father Coyle. The two men attempted to demonstrate to us young hurlers the art of hurling. And the ball dropped between them, and the two men, being very competitive men, went for the same ball, and then forgot who they were and what they were and what they were supposed to do, and really went for the ball, and really went for each other until John Valdy turned around and said, Malachy, hold on. They're cutting the meat, shins off each other. Anyway, enough of that.
And was there much, were girls taught certain things and boys taught other things?
There was indeed, actually. I had completely forgot that side of it. And the way upstairs now, there would have been a sense, that it would mean mainly the boys would be involved in what was seen as the digging, the labour, and that, sort of men's work, out in the garden, if I remember rightly. But certainly in the junior section, boys and girls were taught the same thing. We learned to knit, and we learned to there was a, what do you call it, there was a thing where you used these cards, punch cards with wool, and you could create tapestry. It was a way of learning embroidery, yeah. So we all learned that, yeah. The knitting was a big thing because, sort of, it was definitely seen by the big boys, that's girl stuff, yeah. But we learned it, yeah, up around the rabbit hole, around the wee tree. But other subjects, no. Oh no, there would have been an element of domestic science, but that really just took the form of girls electing themselves to run the milk that we got. We used to get the school milk, and there was an option then at lunchtime if you wanted to have your milk, upgraded with cocoa or further upgraded into drinking chocolate. There was a stove. I can't remember what there was in the wee rooms, and there was a committee of girls, self-appointed there, that used to run the used to run the cocoa making. But that was the height of that, yeah.
Well, you mentioned a ball being thrown out. What other games and activities did you play?
Well, I think there was that football. There was a school football, right? But I can remember an occasion that getting the school football, if there was a school football, or being allowed it if it was a new one, to kick it about, when we made our own balls, and they were made up out of lunch papers, balled into a ball and tied up with binder twine for a kickabout, okay? And that was literally what that was. There was no, it was just a kickabout, right? Okay. I say there was hurling was brought in. There was hurling sticks got, and at one stage there was jerseys got when there were white jerseys with the red hand, and there was red flannel provided. Everybody that was going to have one took their red flannel home and traced their own hand on it, and then their mammy sewed it on their jersey, which I thought was a great idea. But other games and activities were, sort of, football was mainly the boys' game. Okay, there was occasionally there would be tig and hunting and what do you call it, sort of, and carry on like that there. Okay, that would be mixed, but it would be generally boys. Okay, girls would play it as well separately. Girls had a regular playhouses. They called them bobby houses, made up from bits and pieces of crockery and things like that found, and it could be turned into, sort of into whatever the imagination, wherever the imagination took them. And these were run by the big girls, and they would, they would play, sort of role development for the future mothers that they were going to be. And part of that thing would be any new, baby infants, everybody was a baby infant at the start, would be roped in to be the baby of this bobby. And that was an ongoing thing for the girls, okay? And there was an ongoing war that Patsy Toll was telling me about, and I wasn't aware of it, between the big boys and the big girls over this thing. And it was the tradition that as the big boys got a chance of going and wreck the bobby houses. Again, sort of, you can draw what inference you might like from that as to the state of relationship between boys and girls that were going to be the men and women of the future. But that was a common occurrence. There was occasionally there would be all the usual games that were seasonal games. I can remember marbles being big, okay, and I can remember the other thing that would be, and it seemed to come with sort of at certain times of the year, hunting the hare. Somebody would be sent off as a hare. And the hares, as you may know, run in a circle, sort of, whenever they start off, they come back. So that was the idea. The hare would set off with the intention of laying run a course, out round the immediate countryside. And then the pack would, sort of have them counted to whatever it was, would set off after, right? Baying like hounds if they're on the pack. And the hare's responsibility was to run the circle and to be back in time when the class was due back in, yeah. But I think it was Kevin Donnelly running them one day, and he took them that far so that they didn't come back in time. But that was hunting the hare. The other activity that I remember, a game, it was a very rough game, and it was only for the boys and only for the big boys, was in the hallway. The entrance hall, which was used, as an entrance hall, but there's also where you hung wet coats and things like that there. But on a wet day, if it was too wet, and it had to be really bad before this would happen, the big boys, everybody else would be in the classroom upstairs or downstairs, okay? But the big boys would take control of that entrance hall, close the door, close the outside door and the door down into the school, down into the master's room. And then you'd have a game called crushing. And crushing was nothing more than in that dark space and that confined space. It's a bit like, there's this ring, sort of this thing they have now instead of boxing, sort of, they have a wire ring and they have an enclosed ring. And that's what it was, just barging about until see if anybody would panic. Or if anybody got knocked down, you got trapped. Great sport at its best.
And did you have school meals?
No. There was never school meals night. Any meals that you had, that was you brought your sandwiches and whatever, sort of whatever the best you could get. I can remember, I always had a sweet tooth, and sugar sandwiches were very popular. They're a very nice thing, there's what they call. There's something really nice happens if you got good butter and good bread, and you put the sugar in, and sort of by the time you get to eating at lunchtime, the sugars could be nicely, sort of half melted into the thing, but there's still a bit of crunch in it, and a sweet butter. I'd recommend it to anybody that has never tried it. But then alongside that, you had, sort of, if you wanted to get your milk, sort of, and the cocoa, you need to provide your own cocoa. Otherwise, you just drank that, ate that and drank your milk. And then anything else you wanted, sort of, you might have brought along. There was no shops anywhere near. Like the only shop where you could have got anything to eat was Kelly's down in the Green Street. And they really didn't. They never carried sweets. If you had money and you wanted to spend something, the only thing that we used to spend on was oxo cubes or a penny, and you would lick them, and you'd be sick of the taste of oxo in no time at all. So buying oxo cubes was the only alternative to have.
And do you have memories of your journey to and from school? That must have been a big part of the day too.
It was, you didn't realise that until afterwards, sort of. But at the time, your journey to school was, it was putting you in contact with your world, because you walked, and in walking, you observed. And again, John Valley did encourage that, because he used to take us for walks along those roads that were part of our road home. So, sort of as a result of his work, you were informed as to what you were seeing, and then that could be extended right up to your doorstep. He didn't go very far, yeah. So there was that interest in your immediate environment that sort of that was offered to you, and what do you call it, on your way to school. You were in contact with your world and your community, and you would have known landmarks. You would have known the history of them, and you would have spotted. You've been aware of of how what things were happening and changing in your community from what you would observe on your way to school. Like I can remember a significant incident. It's never been resolved. There used to be at the Diamond, if you know what I mean. That's at the junction of the Ballygassoon Road and the Grange Blundell Road, where it goes just. Close to the old Callan Bridge. There was a signpost there in what was the Diamond. It was a grass space at the junction between the junction of the what were the roads, yeah. Finger post. And I remember coming past it one morning. It was riddled, bullet holes. And like that was sensation, right? Of course, that was, and I remember that clearly, and sort of the whole fuss around it, and then who done it, and who were the suspects, and some of the suspects are still alive, and some of the suspects are still denying that it was them, right? Okay, but that put you in contact with the fact that you were walking to school. It put you in contact with what was happening in your world, in a way that I don't think children now have. But again, that's something that I would like to do. Actually, was just for my own thing would be go over that walk and maybe look at some of the landmarks that I would remember from that because it's a trip down. Well, it literally is a trip up memory lane.
And you might visit some of the orchards that you frequented.
Now you bring that up. There was an orchard that we did frequent, and we were not. There was a thing about Pragan orchards, right? Okay, and it was marginal as to whether it was acceptable or not, right? But if there was an orchard that wasn't being pulled and wasn't being looked after, then it was a shame to see good apples going to waste and just being falling to the ground and birds getting it. So there was one orchard like that, and that was the orchard above Craig Collins. Unfortunately, in that orchard there was some very old apple trees, very old eaten apple trees. I can't remember the names of them, but there was at least two of them, and there was the birds got very few. The birds got very few of Craig Collins apples.
And do you remember seeing pigs being killed?
I do. I know that was a different story altogether. So at the time, Kelly's would have kept pigs in a sty, just just beside the house. Within, just beside the road. Yeah. And you would have been aware that the pigs, again the big thing in the summer months, the pigs, when they're kept in those conditions, there is there is pig smell, okay, and it was very distinct and wasn't particularly pleasant. But there it was, that the way things were done at that time. But the big occasion was, when it come to killing, and it been done by a local butcher. And McKinney's where I forget his first name now, was the man that did the job, and that was a big occasion, and it was a very fraught occasion because pigs are intelligent animals, and if there's a house full of them and one of them is is being killed, and it's not it's a brutal business, and that pig doesn't die easy, right? Okay, and the rest of them are then in a panic. They're smelling blood and they know that it's an awful thing. But that was, we would have heard about that, when we would have known that was coming off, and you would have heard about it in the school, and in a way you'd be hoping that it wouldn't be over, that there would still be something to say. And there was, if they were still killing, you would have seen that. And if the killing had proceeded, and it all proceeded in the open air in the spot, shaving the pig, or cutting the throat and gutting it, then shaving it, and then hanging it, but that was, very close to red in tooth and claw. You knew where your bacon come from in those days.
And did the poleaxe it, or what?
Yes, oh yes, absolutely, yeah. It was what he called, there were no humane killers. At that time, it was what he called, it was, as I remember it, yeah. The complete operation was all what he called was, as you say, poleaxe. And I can't remember, ever seeing a poleaxe, but I can remember it being hit with, that I thought was just a hatchet, but maybe that's what it was, yeah.
So what age were you?
Well, I went to school in born 44, 48. That would have been in the right in the 50s, yeah. I left there, and I left the school when I was 10. So between the late 40s, early 50s, yeah.
A big impression.
Pardon? It did leave a big impression, because And I tell you where it come back to me. You know, sort of, you've just raised something now, because um, the fact that you didn't really take it on board at the time. It was tradition, and what I call these were, these were sentient animals that needed to be killed for food, right? And that is still the case, right? Okay, but it was the point of taking a life, and sort of, I do remember seeing fear. And when I was talking about about those being intelligent animals, I do remember, and it's coming back. Thanks for asking the question. It's coming back to me. I do remember looking into that pen when there was others still to be wet and pulled out. And they used to, it was cruel the way they pulled them out. They had this thing called a click, and you hook that in behind the animal's jaw, and that's the way it was coming or I'll fetch you, right? Okay, that's the way they were separated out. Sort of no grabbing or like that. And I can remember seeing the fear in those in an animal's eyes looking over the thing, and it was almost appealing, like, help me, right? And I never saw that since or thereafter, until I remember being in London and on an upstairs on a bus, and there was a cattle lorry when used in London, and there was what he called those cattle on the on the sort of on a big height, sort of they were at the right height, they were looking out and looking at an animal just looking at me, going, same look. Anyway. Well, thank you for that's the impression that stuck with me. Right.
So you mentioned you left school at 10.
Oh, I left the grade school at 10. At the time, the 11 plus was was just fresh and new, and it was the latest thing since sliced bread, and it was seen by most people, but not particularly. Grade people weren't particularly interested in it. It would appear. Sort of that. And John Valdy was very slow to react to the people that were interested in it, in teaching for the 11 plus, which was emerging as a new requirement, really, if you were going to progress. And Mommy and Daddy decided that they wanted the best chance they could get for me, and if John wasn't going to teach specifically and wouldn't or couldn't teach specifically for the 11 plus, at that time, that they would send me somewhere where I would get that chance. So, despite I didn't want to go, because as I said, I was really into a lot of the stuff that I was doing with John Valdy, particularly the nature study. But I was pulled out, and I went into the Christian Brothers to Brother O'Sullivan, who was the top 11 plus man at the time. And I can remember going in for that interview and not really inquiring, what would I be able to carry on with my work that I was interested in at this new school. And I was told a big lie. Oh, we have a big nature study club here. You'll be you'll be at home, totally at home in it. No room for nature study when the 3 hours of the 11 plus were the top priority. But anyway, I left at 10 and went to the Brothers. Yeah.
So the last question, I'll never forget the day at the school when...
Right. Yeah, a good question. Well, I suppose going back to it, the most memorable day that I had at school, and again it was I was at the heart of it, was that day that I found the water scorpion and brought it in, and just it was the sensation of being a discoverer and being recognised as a discoverer, and and fair play to John Valdy for the way he handled it, because the way he handled it was to reinforce in me the fulfilment that making discoveries brings, and beyond that, the fulfilment that sharing discovery makes. Okay, and in a way, that set a pattern for my life. That's my most the thing I remember most at the grade school. Yeah.
Gur míle mai agad.
Well, gur míle mai agat.